Welcome back to another UNC basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're checking us out on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, on THI Publisher, Andrew Jones. And joining me is our Director of Basketball Recruiting and our analyst. He's a former AAU coach and college coach, Mr. David Sisk. And David, the last time we talked about the Tar Heels was after game number 6. Since then, the Tar Heels beat Kentucky and Cleveland, lost at NC State, and then last night lost at Georgia Tech. We're going to run this podcast Friday morning. So if you're listening to it, it's 2 nights ago they lost to Georgia Tech. We're just going to have a conversation here. There's a lot of things to hit on. I want to get your take, just kind of an overview of what you saw in Atlanta from the Tar Heels and kind of where you think things are right now. And we'll just kind of feed off that.
I've, talked a lot about this team. What you see is what you get. Know what the strengths are, know what the weaknesses are. The good points, they'll beat on teams, they'll get to the foul line, they'll win the rebounding battle, they're very good inside. The weaknesses have been the outside shooting, lack of point guard play, and I think starting with North Carolina State was a lack of defense that I think Kevin Keats did a great job of exposing. And I had a fear with the size of North Carolina's front court. They don't have these 6'8", 210-pound jumping jack agile guys. They've got 6'10", 250, 260-pound bruisers. And I kept looking for teams to really get them out on the floor in ball screen situation and try to spread them out and see if they could keep the guards in front of them. We saw North Carolina State do that. I began to wonder last night in the first half if Josh Pastner had watched any of that film whatsoever, and he came back in the second half and just repeatedly put them in ball screen situations, and you saw what happened. So they've got that to deal with now that they haven't had in the past. I think point guard play, like we talked before we went on here, really reared its head last night more than I've seen, and we already knew that was an issue. And I guess it's really disappointing too that they go 8 for 20 from 3 points and lose. If you would have told me they would have gone 8 for 20 from 3-pointer, I would have put the house on North Carolina last night. And
8 for 20 from 3, and they out-rebounded Georgia Tech by 12, and they still lost.
Yeah. So, they're trying to figure out which way to go right now. And like you said previously, there's a lot more questions than there are answers.
Yeah, you go back to Asheville a month ago, and even Iowa, they had that 18-minute stretch in the middle of the game against Iowa where they looked like they were approaching being North Carolina, and they had some snapshots in Asheville. And you just kind of figured with the young guards, so much newness, it will come together. The 18-minute stretch will turn into 22, will turn into 26, will turn into 30, and it hasn't. They did close well against Kentucky, but Kentucky's a bigger mess right now than Carolina is. So, yeah. And Kentucky has a freshman point guard. There's a common denominator in these 4 losses. Matt Coleman, almost 23 years old. He'll be 23 years old in a week, okay? Jordan Bohanna is 23 and a half at Iowa. Braxton Beverly's 22 and a half at NC State. And then Jose Alvarado is 22 years old and plays like a 30-year-old who's still got athletic ability. I mean, he's just got a man's game. And we saw that Wednesday night. That's the common denominator. Kentucky's got a freshman at point guard, okay? And even the win over Stanford, which is their best win, Stanford does have a little bit of youth on the floor. And the guy they think is their best player is a freshman. So I think Carolina's having trouble against older teams that are smart teams and mature teams, and they could figure Carolina out really easily, especially on the perimeter. I mean, it's no secret when you're watching a game when you see the more confident group is the guys in the other uniform. That's rarely been the case against North Carolina for years, but that is the case right now. And you could almost see in the way Carolina moves in the perimeter, their ball movement. Like last night, the ball movement didn't make Georgia Tech's defense move. So every little thing it seems like that the guys are doing in the perimeter lacks confidence. And the other teams that are playing, especially the older ones, it looks like everything they do is with confidence. Alvarado did whatever he wanted to do. He only hit 1 3 and scored 20 points. Usually when a guard goes for 20 against North Carolina, they hit 4 or 5 threes. but he dominated. He put the ball on the floor and did whatever he wanted to do with the ball. Had 7 assists, so wasn't just scoring. He was creating opportunities for everybody else with the dribble. And when you can't stop the dribble, you can't stop anything.
Georgia Tech, like I said, just the ball screens, they were able to drive, they were able to kick, and you saw the same thing repeatedly. You go back to North Carolina State, and I thought they exposed something, and I've already brought it up here, that they want to put North Carolina's bigs out on the floor and extend the defense. But North Carolina wants to defend. They're not going to switch. I mean, you can't switch Garrison Brooks on a point guard. So they have to hedge. And what they do, they want to play soft underneath and then let the guard recover, and then they'll rotate and help and they're matched back up. And what North Carolina State did was say, okay, you're going to play off. We're going to turn the corner on you, and then we're going to attack you because it's downhill. So that's what they did. And Georgia Tech did some of that to a degree, where they just were able to turn the corner. Now, I thought North Carolina might come out. Here's been an interesting thing. Last night was the game where North Carolina didn't fall behind early. Other games they have. And I think if you look at why it happens, I think North Carolina does this. Number one, they wear on you. The bigs inside, they get to the foul line, they win the rebounding, they wear you down. But early on, North Carolina has turnovers. North Carolina doesn't shoot the ball well, and they get behind, and they just methodically come back. But there's another issue here too. North Carolina and Roy, I said, okay, we're going to trap and double you. We're going to go over screens. We're going to pick up the defensive intensity. And that's what they've done to get back in games. They did it at North Carolina State. They doubled everything in the second half off ball screens and worked their way back. But the lineup's not made for that because they've got 2 bigs on the floor. So you might have Garrison, Brooks, and Baycott out on the floor, and you're trying to trap and press. And it's really weird, but it's worked. Well, last night, I thought they might open up in it. They went to that one time, and Georgia Tech got a great look because, like you say, the guards were so savvy, and they could get those looks out of it. The other thing last night that kind of I thought was going to be a problem, and you look at these big post players, and that's the matchup on Jordan Usher. And that was one that really concerned me because you end up with Garrison Brooks on Usher, who's about 6'7", who's quick, who can put the ball on the floor. And they were just total mismatches, especially late in the game. If you'll remember, the same thing happened twice. He was the one who got the kick on the outside. Yeah. Brooks sprints into the closeout. He drives middle. He has to get help from the other post. He dumps it down. Georgia Tech gets 2 layups late in the game. So there were issues all over the court, not only in the backcourt, but all over the court of mismatches of keeping guards and even quicker post players in front of them.
Does it start at the ball screen? Because Roy highlighted that after NC State. And before you answer, I'll say this. Roy doesn't like switching. At times when I've covered them since Roy came back in the last 18 years, it's almost been news sometimes when, hey, they're switching. And there will be against certain teams, we're going to have to switch on these. And they have that. And you're right. You have to have the bigs have to be able to do that, to switch. And right now the bigs aren't able to switch. So that means that the guard has to get around the screen. And that's always been a mandated skill for Roy's guards. If you ask Roy right now, who's the best guard you ever coached in North Carolina getting around screens, he'll tell you Wes Miller. That's one of the reasons Wes can hit threes. He can get around the screen. That's one of the reasons he used to play as much as he did. Joel Berry was not a great defender, but he could get around screens because he was tough. You have to have a toughness. You have to have a will to get around the screens, and that's lacking with their kids right now. You set the screen, and they go around it like with a loop instead of fighting through it and staying their guy and impeding the movement. You don't have to stop the movement, but you have to slow it. You have to interrupt it a little bit, and they're not doing that. So is that kind of where the problems begin with you?
Yeah, there was a big possession at North Carolina State, and North Carolina had gone over the screen, and so your bigs are playing back in behind it, and so you go over your screen. My dog's worked up here. I'm sorry. So you go under the screen, and the bigs playing off. But what happened is they go over, rather, they went under the screen. And I forget which player it was from North Carolina State, but they give him a three-pointer, and he'd been hot, and he went under it. So I know the strategy, they want to play off, but as they get picked apart, here's the problem. They're not consistent with any of their coverage. And what I mean by that, if you go back and watch them, they might have a hard hedge. That was the thing that frustrated me with Garrison Brooks at North Carolina State. One time he was out there on a hard hedge. The other time he was underneath it. He was going to slip, and there weren't different play calls. I don't think they just weren't consistent. And the reason I said I don't think they were play calls was because Walker Kessler was consistently given a hard hedge. There was one time the whole game that Kessler wasn't on top of that screen. Your goal is to make the guard dribble backwards. You show you don't want to let the guard turn that corner. Make him dribble back, turn his back to the floor, back toward the half line, which is what Kessler did repeatedly. And then they went at Brooks, and they went some of these other guys, and they might be on top of it. They might be under. They might not. You never could count on it. And that's the problem to me, and I saw more of it last night. They're just not consistent in their coverages. And to me, that's just your heart that you want to do it. Hey, yeah, you're going to have to sprint. You're really going to have to bust your butt to get out there on top, do it. And it's just like they take plays off. And that's an issue because there's no consistency in our coverages. And if there's not going to be from that hedge guy, then nobody else is going to know what to do.
You know, it's not like Garrison hasn't been a good defensive player before. You know, he's graded out pretty well. Roy said on his radio show the other night that Leakey's defensive grades, I believe against Stanford and somebody else, I can't remember the other team, twice this year has had two of the best defensive grades Roy's ever had from a player. And then his grade against NC State was one of the worst, and Garrison's was bad too. It's one of the reasons they didn't start. And Roy cited that after the game. The defense against NC State, and I will use Roy's terminology, sucked. And that's one of the reasons that those guys didn't start. You know, when you go back to that NC State game, and you were talking about the loop, but Leakey was one of the guys that just kind of didn't get around. So when you go to your next game, the players went home for a couple of days. They come back. Leakey said that, you know, he and Garrison and Caleb were running second and third string the last couple of days. He kind of sensed something was happening. Roy's trying to send a message. He informs them during the shoot around Wednesday afternoon they weren't going to start. And the reason that Roy is identifying for us in the media was the defense against NC State. And I do think there were stretches in other games that kind of led to what we saw against NC State. How much of an impact do you think a move like that can make, especially when two of the three guys that did not start are veterans and have shown in the past they can get the job done defensively, but didn't against State? And to be perfectly honest with you, there were stretches against Georgia Tech where they didn't as well.
I think the bench is the great motivator, and they've got to be able to handle that. You know, one point that we brought up before talking about it is doesn't bother play tech, you know, and he a lot of times he doesn't start. Like you said, he knows what his role is on the team, and he accepts that. I'm trying to think how to put this. There's just, you got to be able to handle that. And if that's something you're going to pout at and not and let it impact your play negatively, then that says a lot about you anyway. They can't win with guys like that. So I hopefully North Carolina doesn't have players like that. I don't know. I'm not there, but you know, he, like you said, he's trying to make the move and shake things up, and you're going to have to shake it up on the defensive end because offensively this team's limited. And so they are not like one of these North Carolina teams in the past where if they gave up 80, 85 points, well, that's not a problem, because I've seen North Carolina teams in the past. You have too. Everybody has. Just like the scoreboard up game in and game out. This is not one of those teams. So, you know, you have to wonder about this. What is that magic number for North Carolina? If they give up over 70, excuse me, if they give up over 70, are they in trouble? Is it 75? Is it 65? I'm not sure that number yet, but I have to begin to worry a little bit if the game gets into the 70s. and that means you're going to have to be a pretty good defensive team, and North Carolina's not that right now.
All right, David, I want to talk some about Caleb Love. He's obviously a huge topic. Carolina fans, it's no secret that he struggled. It's one of the reasons he didn't start Wednesday night. The numbers are not good. He's shooting below 30% from the floor. He was 4 for 34 from three-point range for the season going into Georgia Tech, and he was 2 for 5. So maybe that's a spark, kind of get him going a little bit. But the other problems, his struggles managing the offense, his struggles seeing the interior, so many of the passes he makes in the perimeter don't make defenses move. Like, I think defending him is kind of an easy scouting report right now. What is your take on what you've seen from Caleb? And 9 games in, I haven't really seen much progress. How about you?
Well, he's not a game manager, and I guess what I mean by that, I know you do a lot of football coverage. If he's a quarterback, he's going to make that first hot read. He's not the guy that can check down on the fly to that second, third, and fourth read, And the thing is, you can tell he's really trying to process it in the speed of the game with some of these reads, to where he's really just telegraphing what he does. And if he does change his mind, you can tell it just takes time for it to figure out what to do. And I think that was late last night, down the stretch, not to second guess any coaching here, but I guess I am second guessing. I just couldn't figure out during the stretch while RJ Davis was not running point guard through some of that. And a lot of the big run was made when it was that when Caleb was at the point. And I mean, if you go back and look at him in high school, he was really impressive because he was such a scorer, and he shot in bulk. He was ball centric. I made a comparison to Gilbert Arenas because he was that type of explosive player. But I'm gonna tell you what, his degree of difficulty on shots, I mean, it was one of those deals where he starts putting on a show, and it's just not that he's scoring, it's how he's scoring. They're stepping out, they got a guy in isolation, it's like an and one. He's doing 20 fancy dribbles, and next thing you know, he pulls up off 1 foot, makes a 35-footer with a guy hanging all over him, and fans are running out the door and falling out of the stands, and you're watching it on TV, and you're like, whoa. I mean, I can't wait to see the next one. But that doesn't mean you're going to be a successful system point guard. So there was nothing involved with that in running an offense, of reading defenses, being in a system, having basketball IQ. It was just it was an entertaining score is what it was. So there was nothing really about that really stood out that he could play point guard. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm really surprised. I hope he did break out last night. I'm surprised he's not shooting the ball better than he is, because, man, he had a guy who could put that ball in a bucket written all over him. And I think that's the bigger, like I said, that's probably, to me, the bigger surprise than not being a solid point guard right now.
How much of that is mental?
It gets to be mental. It gets to be mental because I think as a freshman, you start to figure out, man, I'm not sure about this. I don't know as much maybe I don't know as much as what I thought I did, and I don't mean that as a slight. It's just high school basketball and college basketball is different, where everybody's got defensive systems. They've got defensive rotations. They know how to play. There's scouting reports. There's all that. You got to make quick decisions on the fly. And I think what happens too is, naturally, if you're a shooter like he is, or a guy that wants to shoot the ball, and you start doubting and you're not in a flow and you're cautious and you're not sure yourself, then it could impact it there. So I could even see the mental aspect of it, from struggling at a point guard spot, affecting his shooting because he's not comfortable.
How instinctive does he look to you? And if your mind's not right, how much can that really get in the way of your instincts? Just kind of, slow them down to the point where it's almost like you're mentally in quicksand.
I think you're looking at it across the board this year. with a lot of teams that are playing young lineups, especially at the guard spot. To me, there's no mistake that North Carolina, Kentucky, Duke to a degree, Michigan State, some of these teams are struggling because they got so many freshmen that they depend on at that guard spot. And I think if you've got a team that's absolutely loaded, sometimes you could play through that. I know Dick Vitale said years ago, I remember Phi Slamma Jamma when they played North Carolina State, and I was a kid, but I still remember it. And I lived in, we got the Knoxville newspaper on Sunday, the Knoxville News Sentinel. And Houston, if I'm not mistaken, they played Louisville in the semifinals and destroyed them. I mean, destroyed them. And Dick Vitale was in, they had him quoted in the paper the next day, and I still remember this from 40 years ago. And he said, I've always said that a team could not win a national championship with a freshman point guard. He said, I'm rescinding that. Houston's going to win it with a freshman point guard. And we all know what happened.
Wasn't that Alvin Franklin?
Alvin Franklin, sure was. And so it's important. It's important because, like I said, North Carolina right now, you could see I'm going to say about the 12, 13 minute mark, even though North Carolina had led the whole game. And this was when Georgia Tech was still behind 4, 5, 6 points, and they had yet to tie the game up. And I'm like, uh-oh. Georgia Tech now is scoring easier than North Carolina scoring. And it's just like every time down the floor, whether they made the shot or not, even when they made the shot, it was almost like pulling teeth. It was like going for a root canal offensively for North Carolina because it was such a struggle. Doesn't mean, and they still had a good field goal percentage and they scored, but it was such a struggle. They had to work so hard against that zone to get a good look and get the ball where they want it. And when you have to do that much passing, when you have to do that much prodding, and you got an inexperienced guards out there, you're going to have empty possessions.
Yeah, and that's why in my column I kind of highlighted feeding off what Leakey said about them being selfish, about the guards maybe being selfish and how the bigs need to get touches all the time. They built that 61-53 lead, getting some threes, but a team like North Carolina can't suddenly hit threes and think, yeah, we're going to ride that horse.
Can I say this for you? I'm sorry about cutting you off, but we'll change the topic and I'll forget. I thought the post last night, number one in turnovers, it's across the board. I think last night, like I said, the lack of point guard play probably showed more. But if you look at the turnovers, the post players if you look at the stats after the game, every player that gets out there has got 2 or 3 turnovers.
Yeah.
I mean, the post is turning it over as much as the point guards. So there's the turnover issue across the board. So as much as we've talked about the lack of point guard play, it's not fair to put all that on them as far as just the number in quantity. But I'm going to say this too. They got the ball inside. I thought Baycott's miss when Alvarado doubled down on him, and he's got a 6-footer in front of him, and he's got a 3-footer, and he threw it through the backboard. Yeah. And Georgia Tech comes down and hits a 3. I thought that was a huge 5-point swing in the game. Garrison Brooks, he had a mid-range jumper about 10 feet. He's wide open in the paint. He misses it. So, it's easy to pass the buck a little bit, but I thought the bigs were plenty to blame last night.
In that same period, Armando also got the ball turned and brought the ball down low, and a guard came, rotated down and stripped the ball right from him. So they had several strips from the bigs where they had opportunities to go up and score, and the ball never got close to the rim.
Kessler never could get a shot off against them.
No, I mean, in a year or two from now, he's going to flush that thing.
Yeah.
But he's not ready to flush it right now. But as I was saying about the threes, when you're getting lucky to hit 2 or 3, you're happy if Kerwin hits a few in a row against Kentucky 2 weeks or last week, and Andrew does it against NC Central to kind of get you through a moment and kind of gives you a little bit of clearance. You can't ride that to the finish line. This team's not going to beat anybody just going nuts from 3-point range. And one of the things that happened the other night, or happened last night, was that they hit those threes. They went up 8. Kerwin hit 3 in a span of 2:49. Andrew hit a 3 in there. Caleb even had a couple of threes. Both, I think, were in the second half. But at some point, you've still got to be who you are, especially when you don't have much room for error. And they went away from it. In my column, I noted, and this was taking Leakey's words and say, okay, I looked to see, okay, Leakey says the bigs aren't getting touches. So I looked at the shot chart. And over the last 15, 16 minutes, Armando had 1 field goal attempt, and he went to the line twice at 9:25 and at 3:25, somewhere in that range. Garrison had 1 shot attempt in the last 15 minutes. Dayron Sharp had 2 shot attempts in the last 13 and a half minutes and went to the line. They weren't getting the ball inside. They kind of went. They used being who they aren't to kind of take that lead, and they didn't change. They didn't say, okay, we got the lead now. Let's get the ball back inside. There was no concerted effort, and that's incumbent upon the guards. The guards have to recognize, see the paint, feed the post. They did that in the first half. They fed the post a lot in the first half and had a little bit more success. And I'd be willing to bet you, if you went back and look at the possessions, that the post guys got a much higher percentage of touches when RJ was at the point than when Caleb was at the point. And RJ was at the point more in the first half than he was in the second half.
They made some adjustments, Georgia Tech, and that zone that they run is highly unusual. When I saw them earlier in the year, they ran a straight 1-3-1. Now they would match up somehow, but it was a 1-3. You would come down, and it was a 1-3-1 alignment. And that last night, it's a matchup. I can't tell you what their coverages are. I don't know. I've watched it, and they're all over the place. The guy under the bucket may be guarding a point guard before it's over. I mean, they're everywhere. But they did adjust, and they took away the high post, of any dump down last night, and they really doubled down from the top. And I think they gave them 3-point looks. From what I saw last night in the game, the shot that was there was to skip. Because when the ball went to the wing, they helped down and they dug so much from the top down on the post, and they took away the high post. The skip to the opposite wing was what was open, or maybe even to the top from the corner, because they had 10 feet in the paint. And so I think there was some confusion, and it's a different look. I saw more man-to-man from them early in the year. They changed up defenses. If you'll look, I don't know that they went man-to-man any in the second half. They did. It was no more than 1 or 2 possessions. I mean, it was straight, that matchup zone, whatever it was, and it I think caused confusion.
Well, they've seen multiple different kinds of defenses this year, and they've had the same problems no matter what they've gone up against. So now that we move forward, the game against Syracuse Saturday has been postponed because of COVID issues at Syracuse. So Carolina fans don't have to worry about watching a basketball team right before the Orange Bowl. They just get to focus on the Orange Bowl on Saturday. They got to go to Miami, though, next Tuesday in basketball. I get to go there twice in a span of a few days. Not complaining about that, but what kind of basketball team do you think I'm going to see?
You get to go to Miami twice?
Yeah, I'm going for the Orange Bowl.
That's a third time this winter.
Yeah, well, third time in less than a month. Well, my wife's a nurse. She works nights.
You're a snowbird.
She can't get out of her schedule, so I gotta come back because she's got to work. And we've
You're
got
a snowbird.
Pardon me?
You're a snowbird.
Yeah, well,
I'm
I'm not complaining having to go to Miami, but I won't be able to go anymore. So I got to enjoy this while I can. But when I go down there next Tuesday, what kind of team am I going to see? How do you think that a group that has the dynamic of a few old guys that are system guys mesh with a bunch of young guys who I think their heads are spinning right now? I think that's a fair thing to say. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation. And they've got a few days to get ready for another road game. They played twice in the Dean Dome this year. Mm-hmm. I've seen them once because the second game of the Dean Dome, I was at Miami for football. So there's going to be 3 straight road games in the ACC to open the season against teams that on paper they should defeat, but it didn't happen the first 2 times. The defense let them down. Shot selection, bad movement, that kind of stuff on offense let them down. What do you think Carolina fans are going to see Tuesday night in Miami?
Well, it's weird. Like you said, your first 3 games now, the way the schedule falls in the ACC are all road games. And I guarantee you that probably never happened in the history of North Carolina in the ACC. So scheduling is weird this year anyway with the way everything's falling because of COVID. Miami, I saw them last night. You're going to have to remind me, who did they play? I saw them for a little bit last night.
They were at Virginia Tech two
Yeah.
nights ago, I think.
Yeah, and they had a lot. I watched a few minutes of it, and they were running down all the injuries that they've got.
Chris
And
Likes being the big one. Chris Likes would be another old guy at the point that has given Carolina trouble in the past that would clearly give RJ and Caleb problems. But I'm not sure he's going to play Tuesday night.
there was a whole list of them. There was about 4 or 5 guys, and the announcers were really just basically praising Miami that they were able to keep the game competitive with all the guys that they've got out. So that's going to be an issue there playing them. You know, Miami's probably in the same boat or even worse off than North Carolina right now. Who can they get back healthy by that game? And that's a huge question. You know, I thought that we would see a better North Carolina team last night simply because they had a week to work on things. So they've got another week to work. So you're basically talking about between North Carolina State and Miami, they're one game in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a lot of practice time, and that's a lot to get better on. But I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what I saw last night that would tell me, hey, they've made a ton of improvements, except they got off to a better start. And that was probably the one issue, but Georgia Tech couldn't throw it in the ocean early. And from having seen Georgia Tech this year, whenever Otto and DeVoe and those guys get hot, they're streaky. And when they get hot, you're at their mercy. So they've just got to continue, like I said, I think more than anything, just practice and try to continue to get better in practice, and the players learn and they take what happens in drill work, in practice work, and make that work during games. But I don't know. Like I said, we didn't see it last week, and that's on the players.
That brings up a question, though, David, that I think a lot of people are probably thinking right now that are listening to this. You've coached for what, 25 years, something like that, more. If you have time to practice like Carolina does right now, how do you get guys who are struggling with confidence to be confident without seeing success in a game? So let's say you want to elevate the confidence from when they left Georgia Tech to when they get to Miami and take the court. In that window in between, how can you get a freshman's confidence up without actually seeing results in a game?
A lot of building up. You know, Lou Holtz used to say between Saturday and Saturday, he said in film, Sunday and Monday, he said, we tear them down. We start building up about Tuesday. So I think a lot of that. I think, you know, a lot of times I think you see success in practice. How many times have you heard coaches say, you know, we had our best couple of days in practice. I feel good about this. And then you go out and game, you lay an egg. You know, it happens a lot. So you just got to constantly reinforce. And the thing is, they have to keep doing the good stuff in practice over and over and over. And, you know, I guess we were all raised to, hey, if you do the right thing the right way, the right time, the right reason, eventually you're going to succeed. So that goes with what they've got to do. And players have just got to continually work hard. They've got to be mentally tough. That's going to be a question to the young team. And I guess with some of the older guys, you know, can you struggle and be mentally tough and continue to have a good attitude going into practice where you can see some results? And I know this, the thing we'd always tell our kids about basketball, even after a tough loss like that, we would say, hey, here's the great thing about basketball. You don't have to sit on it for a week. So if we get beat on Tuesday night, we're going to play again Friday night. We'll have 2 days of practice and we can go out and right a wrong. But it's almost like a football schedule now. You're playing once a week. So it can be really long. I'm not going to lie. And these practices, they begin to be like drudgery. And I promise you, nobody in that program is having any fun right now.
How does leadership in a moment like this, is this when the leadership internally, when maybe there's only so much Roy can do, it has to happen from within? It has to be Garrison getting pissed off or recognizing what buttons to push or leaky, or is this totally incumbent on Roy? Roy's got to be, sometimes a coach has to be the leader because it doesn't really exist on his roster. Is Roy at that moment where maybe he's got to be the leader? He's got to be a little bit different. And in doing so, does that mean a practice where you just destroy them? You kick their butts? You do one of those Tom Izzo no basket football pad practices? Or do you pull them off and go have fun and do something totally different away from basketball?
Roy's the only guy can answer that. He and his coaching staff, because they know the personality of their team. It's going to depend how fragile they are. I think Tom Izzo probably builds his around the kind of kids he recruits. That he just wants those tough, hard-nosed kids.
What Michigan kids?
What you get, yeah, and that's what you get, and that's what they'll want, and that's what they respond to. You know, Bobby Knight recruited a certain kind of kid, and I think Roy knows his team. So the thing is, he knows if the team is fragile, if players are fragile, what they'll respond to. Is there a chance of breaking them? He doesn't want to do that this early in the year, but you're going to ask yourself, if you're Roy, hey, is there anything I need to adapt? And I think coaches do that constantly. Is there something in here I need to change? Do I need to teach it a different way? Is there things that we need to do differently? So there's a lot of obviously looking in the mirror and it'll start with Roy. I mean, I don't think there's anybody going to ask more questions right now than Roy Williams and his staff.
I agree with you. I think Roy, people say that Roy is stubborn and doesn't change, and I think I totally disagree.
Roy says he's stubborn.
I can sit here and itemize numerous occasions in which Roy has made tremendous changes. Look at last night. I mean, he swapped out 3 starters. And you know, he waits to see. He wants intel. He doesn't make rash decisions. Some coaches do things just for the sake of doing it. I think there's a lot more method behind what Roy's doing when he does things. Going back to the word fragile, so people understand, fragile doesn't mean you're saying they're fragile kids, but you could be in a fragile state. You could be in a fragile point. And I do think when you watch this team that there is a little credence to suggest that they're a little bit fragile right now. Again, I'm not saying they're fragile kids, I'm not saying it's a fragile team, but they're kind of going through that point right now. So when that's the case, does that mean different buttons? And if so, how do you pull a team out of that as well?
Well, it's also, there's a lot of times, from my experiences, the coach didn't have to do as much if you had verbal leadership. You know, you had 2 or 3 guys. Bill Parcells always talked about having 5 or 6 guys. He had his Pepper Johnsons and guys like that. And no matter where he was at, where he was with the Giants or the Patriots or the Jets, there were guys that he took with him, and they were at all 3 stops. And I always, that always stuck out to me. And a lot of times he would do it. He would take guys well past their prime, and they made the cut, and he put them on a roster. And the reason was they were able to offer leadership, you know, and players looked at them, and the young players responded to them. And I just think you see it now in the NFL some, and I just think that's huge. But does North Carolina have that? Do they have, because you really don't want it to come from a freshman. You want it to come from older players. And we look, I don't see a whole lot of a loud guy. I think Andrew Platek would probably come across like that. Garrison Brooks doesn't come to me like a kid that you know was very outspoken at all. I don't know about Baycott and some of those. So, you know, is it more on the coaches? So that's kind
of going back to what I was asking about. And I do think you can lead by example. I think Luke May led by always approaching everything he did to a certain standard. So if you're in that room, you see that standard every day with everything he did, you know that you can't, it's going to be noticed when you're not at that standard as well. And then you have the rah-rah guys. If you ask Roy who his best leaders at Carolina have been since he came back, it wouldn't surprise me the first name out of his mouth is David Noel. In 2016, that was a year after the title. They started a bunch of freshmen, Frazier at the point, Ginyard at the 2, Tyler Hansbrough. You also had Danny Green on that team, a lot of freshmen, very young team. And David Noel was an amazing leader for that group. they had some rough patches that they were able to get through in part because of David. David led by example. David led because he was a great rah-rah guy. David gave them energy. That wasn't a year in which the coach would have to lead a bunch of young players. But what I'm seeing right now, I'm not seeing the leadership and the personalities that maybe can be leaders that will be leaders. So I question whether or not Garrison has all that within him, whether Leakey has all that within him. And maybe that was part of what Roy was trying to do, send a little message, maybe ignite some of that if it's within, try to extract it.
Let me ask you this. Which one of the older guys would you say would be leading by example then? Like I said, if I'm watching Garrison Brooks over and over in a ball screen situation, one time he might get out in the edge, one time he might not. He just plays off. And like I said, watching him defensively, he just hasn't been consistent just with his effort to me. And Leaky Black, Roy was very critical of him after the North Carolina State game. So let's say they were verbal, and let's say we got guys leading by, but then it becomes hollow because you say, okay, do as I say, not as I do. So there's no, you can't, their deeds are not in line with their actions. So
I think Garrison,
I'm sorry. So I don't know that you're getting either one.
I think Garrison is kind of cut from that cloth a little bit more as far as a lead by example guy, but we haven't seen it as much this year. And I'm surprised by that. Look, Garrison's the son of a coach. The minute he showed up, he was doing a lot of fundamental things right. He fit in with the team because Garrison's one of those guys that was never really out of place. He understood the game. He could think a couple of movements ahead. I question whether or not his confidence is fully in sync and his mind is 100% right now because he doesn't seem like the same guy all the time. And because of that, it might appear that the effort's not there. But you know as well as I do, David, when you're kind of wobbling upstairs, the body's not going to move the way the body does when you're not wobbling upstairs. And I think that's one of the issues with him. And maybe that's what Roy was trying to ignite. I don't really know. I mean, maybe Garrison needs one of those 25 and 12 games to get him going. Usually really good players don't have to have a big game to get going. They just kind of make it happen and they get it going before then. That's when they get the 25 and 12s. It's kind of hard to figure out because Garrison's a work ethic guy. He's a very hard worker. He's always been sort of a by the books guy. He's someone who takes tremendous pride in wearing that jersey. I remember last year at NC State when he went for 30 and 15 or something crazy like that. And I said, man, you're channeling your inner Tyler Hansbrough and your inner Luke May. And he was overwhelmed by the comparison. He gets it. He understands what it's like to be in that program and to kind of wear that banner. That's why it's been a little surprising at times to see him out of place and maybe the head down after a bad play and those kind of things when the leader has to have the head up after a bad play.
Well, maybe in times before he has not had to be the leader. He's not had that on his shoulders. Yeah. He was one of the better players, but now he's a senior. So, obviously his roles have probably changed a little bit.
Well, you're right. Not everybody has that within them. And maybe it's just not something that Garrison fully has. So it goes back to the question, does Roy have to maybe be the leader of this team?
Yeah, but he probably has been. So there's your frustrating thing. If you've been – coaches say this, if I have to coach effort and I have to coach spirit and things like that and leadership, then – it's not going to be successful. Those are things that players have got to take on. I'm here to put us in the right position to win. So it can become overwhelming for Roy too if he and his staff has to do all that because sooner or later that's on the guy on the player. So if the coach has, we've said this before, if I have as a coach have to come in and provide the energy. And I have to do it over and over and over. That's draining for a coach, but that team can't be successful.
Yeah. And you're not coaching other elements of the game that you need to focus on as well. I think Leakey and Garrison said a lot of good stuff, the stuff that if you're a Carolina fan, you want to hear after the game. I think Leakey got called out teammates a little bit. I think Garrison did a little bit too about the defensive end. And they both were very accountable for why they didn't start and for the fact that they have not been playing up to a standard that they believe, and I'm sure Roy and people watching this believe they should be playing at. So if there is a launching point for a change of course for this team, perhaps it occurred last night, and perhaps it was a bottoming out. I'm a believer that no matter what you do in life, sometimes you got to bottom out and kind of air things out, put everything out on the table, and then you begin to rebuild. And that could have been what happened in Atlanta.
Sorry, I'm muted. I got a dog here in the living room, and I'm afraid he's going to go berserk here at any time.
Okay. It'll just add to the podcast, man.
Oh, yeah. Give her 2 cents worth. They're very close to winning at North Carolina State. They were very close to winning at Georgia Tech. So what happened? How would we feel right now if they were 2-0 in the ACC and they were 7-2 overall? We would, even if there were 1-point victories, we would take a different look at it. North Carolina State, they made that comeback like they always do, and I was surprised. It was kind of like the Georgia Tech game last night, where you felt like, okay, if Georgia Tech ever gets this thing tied, North Carolina's in trouble.
Yeah.
What was on the shoe was on the other foot at North Carolina State. And it was like, if you can ever get that thing tied, they're in trouble. And North Carolina, I don't know how many times cut that thing to 2 and never could tie it, never could take the lead. Just an unbelievable amount of possessions where they were down 2 and had the ball and couldn't knot it up. So it's a different thing, just a different flow of the game. And it's not like this was really the first time that North Carolina has led and had it to usually wear down on teams and then just fall apart the last 6 or 7 minutes. So, you hope they have, but they've just got to find a way to win close games. And they've got to be able, number one, they can't have the turnovers. You've got to make open shots. And like you say, probably get the ball inside more, get on the line. But, they missed some big foul shots last night, especially in the bigs. Daron Sharp had an empty trip where he was 0 for 2. I think Baycott, did he go to the line twice and go 1 for 2 each time, I think?
Yeah, that was in the last
time. So those kind of things, but I think so too. And in high school, we've had an opportunity to coach some pretty good teams who we never felt like they could score a lot, but we never felt like when it came down to it in a tight game that they could get a stop. And that, I think to a coach, that's kind of demoralizing. So they've got to turn it around on that end, because you just had a feeling last night in the final 8 to 10 minutes that Georgia Tech was going to score every possession. And you better match them offensively, because you are not going to be able to do it on. I'll give you an example. You remember the play when Garrison Brooks just lost his guy on a back cut. I believe it was Usher. You remember that one down like 2 minutes left, and Usher, there was nobody running for 20 feet, and he missed a layup. It was just a straight line cut, first cut, and he lost him. And Usher, and it was like, man, how did they miss that shot?
That was their only miss.
I hope they missed. Because
that was their only miss. Georgia Tech was 6 for its last 7.
Yeah.
Carolina was 1 for its last 7.
Mm-hmm. And at
19-6 run, there you go. It sums it up.
19-6 in the last 6:53 in Georgia Tech's favor. So they've got to find ways. And, when your confidence down, winning those games is the hardest thing. You've got to find ways to close and win tight ball games.
And they lost a ton of close ones last year, and you got to wonder if the guys that were on that team are starting to think a lot about that. The next time North Carolina takes the court is January 5th at Miami. It'll be the 3rd straight conference road game to open the season. As I said before, it won't be till January 9th for the Tar Heels play their 3rd home game of the season. That's with Clemson coming in, and don't sleep on Clemson. The Tigers, it may sound weird, might be the best team in the ACC right now. They got to go to Florida State in the stretch coming up. So Carolina's got a tough stretch coming up right now with the way they've been playing. Every game's tough game. So he's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. We'll do another one of these here and after the next couple of games where we take a deep look back at what the Tar Heels are doing. Perhaps we will have a different theme the next time we do this. Carolina's got Miami next week. I'll be down there in South Florida twice in about a 3-day period. So I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing what the Tar Heels look like in the Orange Bowl. And then, of course, against Jim Laranaga's wounded Hurricane. By the way, they're always wounded. He can never field 10 guys. He never run 10 guys out of the tunnel. It's crazy what's going on down there.
I'm going to tell you, if I played at Miami, I'd be trying to figure out some way to get out of practice. I'm hurt, coach. I think I need to go to the beach and rehab a little bit.
Yeah, I got to go to Coconut Grove to get good.
Oh, yeah.
All right. He's David. I'm AJ. Thanks for stopping by.